Why don't we talk about defunding the military? And there are some people here who know a lot about the whole question of militarism and the expense of doing it, as well as, of course, we're very preoccupied with the harmful social effects of militarism. But Tamara Lawrence is working on a PhD thesis that will involve showing the connection between the military and the environment, especially global warming, and of course expenses, the cost of the military. So she's a bit of an expert on that, or quite an expert actually. And of course, Alan Ware, coming from Prague, also is an expert, because you have this big movement for move the money, trying to get people to remove their investments in military corporations, or companies that manufacture military equipment. So why don't we talk a little bit about that? And my notion is, we're going to defund the military. We have to give some thought to what are the alternatives, because when a problem arises, the first thing that people will think of doing is sending in the troops. Well, if we're not going to have any troops to send in, we've got to think ahead about what we're going to do under those circumstances.
Saul Arbus, actually, with the Canadian Peace Initiative and the Global Alliance for Ministries of Peace. Now, I've just completed, with the help of a noted Canadian defense analyst and researcher, an article that I've prepared on exactly this question, defunding militarism, which I'm about to submit to several papers in Canada. And to go back to what the last thing you said, what do we do? It provides a tremendous opportunity, this idea of defunding militarism. I've said not the military, but militarism, because that embraces the police militarization as well. But the great opportunity that's presented here is in the work that Peter Langell and Peggy Mason and others have done, and that is the idea of the United Nations Emergency Peace Service, a standing group. It's not called an army, but they're using another word for this, which is under UN command. It's something between 12 and 15,000 members. They're trained in peace building as well as any kind of actual military engagement that allows for the most important kind of intervention, that is early intervention, non-violently, in issues and areas that are either in violence or about to erupt into violence. But what the opportunity provides is that it allows the idea that if we have the standing body, which everyone supports in the UN, and that won't be easy to do, then we don't need anything more in Canada or in any other nation beyond the ability for what I would call self-defense. With the inability to be a belligerent in any other conflict, that is to say, not able to attack another nation by virtue of its forces. I've also analyzed Canadian expenditures helped by both Peter and Tamara. It's phenomenal what we have in mind in Canada in terms of overall expenditures for the military. And in a recent quote from the Deputy Minister of our National Defense Department, Jody Thomas, she has received no indication from the federal government that intends to reduce its much increased military spending, despite the soaring deficit and the critical need to prepare for the post-COVID-19 recovery in Canada. There's an opportunity here, and there's an alternative also that I presented in terms of UNEPs. Thank you.
I think, Tamara, you've been following that more closely than I have. Can you speak to that
Yeah, so I've been studying the federal public accounts for the past about 16 years, and I started doing so because I was really concerned about the climate and ecological crisis and wondering why it was that the federal government didn't seem to have enough money to invest in action for climate change, protecting biodiversity, protecting water, etc. And I had several meetings with the federal minister of environment and other officials, and then I started looking at the public accounts to figure out where the money was going. And this was at the time that Canada started its war in Afghanistan, and there seemed to always be, money for the war in Afghanistan, but there wasn't money to deal with the climate crisis. And then I looked at the public accounts and saw that, so much money is going to the military and so little is going to the Department of Environment and Climate Change. So last year, according to the public accounts, the Department of National Defense received $31 billion, but the Department of Environment and Climate Change got only $1.8 billion. And we know that the federal Department for Environment and Climate Change doesn't have enough resources to do the science, to do public education, to do monitoring and enforcement. So they need more resources, and I am very concerned about all of the planned defense procurement. And I think that, we should really talk about what we can do to stop the Canadian government from purchasing new fighter jets and building new warships. If anybody wants me to send the links for the public accounts and some of the documents that I prepared around military spending in Canada, I'm happy to share those with you so that you have the information and you can go to your member of parliament and friends and family and let them know that we spend too much money on the military.
How does Canada compare in terms of military spending to other comparable countries such as Australia, perhaps even Britain, although Britain is a nuclear state?
Oh, that's a good question, Adam. So every year, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, prepares their annual report on trends on military expenditures, and they rank countries from highest, the United States, last year, which is about $700 billion. Then second is China at about $250 billion. And then you have countries like Saudi Arabia, India, France, the UK, being in, and Russia. Russia is about 60 billion. Russia is about 1/10 what the United States spends on its military.
Oh, wow.
And Canada has actually been going up in the rankings. So we are right now ranked 14th. We are just behind Australia. So Australia spends more. Australia, of course, is a partner with Canada and the United States and the UK on the Five Eyes Alliance, that security community. So we're 14th highest in the world. And then I'll also just mention that among NATO members on a cash amount, Canada is ranked 6th highest among all NATO members for military spending. So you often hear in the news, Canada doesn't spend very much on the military, as a percentage of GDP. But this is very deceptive. Actually, if you look at the total amounts, we're 6th highest in NATO. We're 14th highest in the world. We spend way too much money on the military.
What are the top military expenditures in the Canadian context, and what do you think are the most pressing issues for Canada's military that maybe focal points for kind of defunding efforts?
In the summer of 2017, the Liberal government announced its new defense policy called Strong, Secure, and Engaged. And in that document, you can see how the plans for military spending over time. So the two largest federal government procurements in our history is the planned purchase of the new fighter jets, which will be about $19 billion, not including life cycles. And then the most expensive defense procurement in our history is the building of the warships at the Halifax shipyard for about $70 billion, not including life cycle costs. But if you look at military spending, the biggest chunk is for the soldiers, is for is for personnel costs. And under this new defense policy of 2017, the Canadian government is planning to massively increase the armed forces. So they're going to recruit more soldiers. They're going to target Indigenous people, women, and ethnic minorities to try to increase the armed forces, the personnel.
Was this possibly a response to Trump? Because I know, in various meetings, Trump has come out blasting a lot of countries, including Canada, for not paying enough and not spending enough on the military. And I wonder whether this response from Canada was just to placate our neighbor.
Our new defense policy, strong, secure, and engaged, is very much informed and influenced by the United States and our membership in NATO. And because we're a member of NATO, and we made an agreement in 2014 at the NATO summit in Wales that all NATO members are going to commit to spending 2% of GDP on their military by 2024. At Canada's already high military spending of about $30 billion, we are at 1.3% of GDP. So if we increase to 2%, it's going to go, our military spending is going to be at, upwards of 45 billion plus. So our defense policies are very much informed by our relationship with the United States and our membership in NATO. And this is one of the reasons why I am so strongly opposed to NATO, because I do not want our country to spend our precious tax dollars on more defense procurement and more weapon systems when we are facing catastrophic climate change, and we need to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals to help the whole planet.
What is the difference between the NATO Association of Canada and NATO? I often see references to the NATO Association of Canada. There's posters around my neighborhood about it. I see it on social media. I see it in references in articles. And then you hear about NATO. Are they the same, or are they different organizations?
Oh, Adam, thank you. That's a great question, and I love to talk about this. So the NATO Association of Canada is like the propaganda wing for NATO. So all NATO members have this type of organization in their country. So in the United States, it's called the Atlantic Council, and all of these organizations in the various NATO members are part of the Atlantic Council Association umbrella. Now, if you look at the NATO Association of Canada website, and you can see that they get some money from foundations, but also a lot of money from American weapons manufacturers like Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics, because the big weapons manufacturers, they really love NATO. And actually, they pushed for NATO expansion in the mid-1990s because NATO provides a guaranteed market for their weapon systems. And to be a NATO member, you have to stay interoperable with all of the allies. So you have to constantly upgrade your weapon systems. So in January of 2019, the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, for the 70th anniversary of NATO, we started protesting once a month outside of the NATO Association of Canada office.
This morning I was listening to the Michael Enright's final show on CBC, and he had someone on that, along with a number of other guests that were making predictions into the future. And this individual, I'd forgotten his name, said that one thing COVID is likely to do is force nations around the world to redefine and re-examine their defense budgets. Is there any redeeming feature to them at all in their attempts to reinvent themselves over the years? It's been pointed out here in Ontario, for example, that it was a military that Premier Ford brought in to finally uncover the terrible conditions in nursing homes and how these people were being cared for during this pandemic. It probably not the best way to finally own up to our deficiencies in social and security and health provision, but nevertheless, an indication that the Army, in some ways, can perhaps, along with the rest of us, redefine what security and safety means. Is there any possibility of that at all in your mind?
If we were not spending so much money on the military, we could have afforded high quality, universal, excellent long-term care for our seniors, and there wouldn't have been a need for the military to come and help during this pandemic, because we would have already had high quality long-term care. The other thing is we could have free post-secondary education for all our young people if we cut military spending. But the military is pulling out right now of the long-term care homes, and they're being replaced by the Red Cross. Actually, the Red Cross, responds to emergencies and responds to natural disasters, much better without armed force. The military is a very expensive institution, and they are, they train for war. They are not training for natural disasters. This is not what they want to be doing. Been intense pressure on NATO members to increase military spending. Over the past 5 years, NATO members have contributed more than $100 billion extra dollars on the military over the past 5 years to try to meet this 2% target. Imagine instead if we were investing in healthcare and in education and dealing with climate action. NATO is actually causing us to divert our attention from our real security needs.
The huge amount of money that's going into military is taken away from money that could be invested in human security. And human security is a broad range of things like conflict resolution, peacemaking, public health, democracy, ensuring that you have engagement of communities in the decision making, environmental, climate, all those issues. And so there's been a huge amount of discussion on this. In the light of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was also discussions at the political level. So this is not just amongst campaigners and UN people, but there was discussions in a number of governments. So I'm in the Czech Republic, and this is one of them, about possibly cutting the defence budget in order to be able to provide more funding for the human security elements. But then what happened, that only lasted for a little while, and then the arms industry sort of came into the debate and started putting forward and doing their lobbying of why we have to spend more money on military, why the military is helpful to dealing with the pandemic, why there's other issues that are coming up that we have to have more military. So I want to emphasize that the political forces that are pushing for militarism, the military-industrial complex, is an incredibly powerful force in this that we don't give enough attention to. Tamara is quite right to bring up NATO, which is a political framework which is advancing militarism. There are military frameworks also, the armed forces and the heads of the armed forces. But I think that one of the strongest political forces for the militarism is the arms industry, and we need to focus on that a little more. They hide behind think tanks, which they fund. They hide behind, other parliamentarians, which they also fund political campaigns for. We have to expose them, and we have to look at how can we address that. And one of those is divestment. Another is direct action on the military budgets, and I think these go hand in hand. So that's where I think, the new capacities for citizens to be able to be involved in divestment is really exciting. We can take back, some of the power of the money. And that includes individual investments. It includes looking at our banks. It includes looking at our cities. What are our cities investing in? What our pension funds are investing in? What our religious organisations are investing in? Our universities. And in some cases, like in New Zealand, we can even go to our government funds. So in New Zealand, we've managed to get our government funds to stop investing in corporations which are involved in the manufacture of nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons delivery systems. We haven't quite got them to go the full distance of non-investment in the entire military-industrial complex, but this is a big start, to take on the investments in the nuclear weapons, which is what we could do at the federal level in New Zealand. We're also now getting them to stop investing in fossil fuels, and this is another exciting area where we can build cooperation, because the fossil fuel divestment campaign is big. They've got a lot of success in divesting a large number of universities, cities, pension funds from fossil fuels. So we can build on that, because what it means is that financial managers are already having to look at their investment portfolio, and screen it. So to screen for, if they've already been screening for the fossil fuel industry, which is quite hard to do, that's quite complex, and then you come in and say you should also screen against nuclear weapons producers or against military producers, it's not that difficult to add that on. And we've had a lot of success in bringing these two divestment campaigns together in Switzerland and Germany, where in Switzerland, most of the pension funds now have divested from nuclear weapons, nuclear energy, and fossil fuel industry. In Germany, there are about 10 cities, governments, that have joined together to divest from fossil fuels, nuclear weapons, and the war weapons. So this is, I think, an exciting way of moving forward and addressing that really strong political force, which is the weapons industry. Thanks.
Have you heard much in the North American context about that? I heard New York City was one city that did that, but have you heard of other cities in North America, or is it kind of more of a European movement right now?
So in the US, there are about 4 cities which have divested from nuclear weapons. Massachusetts, Berkeley, I've just forgotten the other 2. There's one that will be on war, and David Swanson managed to divest from the arms industry and fossil fuels. And then New York, what's happened with New York is New York has divested from fossil fuels. There's quite a number of cities have divested from the fossil fuel industry. And now they have got a draft resolution to divest from nuclear weapons industry as well, but it's just been put on hold because of the pandemic. But it's got enough support in New York City to get adopted once it's get taken to the vote. So,
yes, Nyla, tell us about Kashmir and what's going on there.
Hello. So real quick, I thought I'd talk about the militarization in Kashmir. So I remain of the firm opinion that the welfare of the people of Kashmir can be guaranteed by securing the goodwill of the political establishments of both India and Pakistan, and by the display of military discipline and efficiency at the borders. The forte of the armed forces of a country, to the best of my knowledge, is national security, not national interest or foreign policy. And if the political evolution of a society is nipped in the bud by an all-powerful military establishment, state policies always fall short of becoming coherent, which is exactly what we have been seeing in Kashmir since 1989. And the more the military establishment makes incursions into democratic spaces, the more shaky institutions of state remain, and the more fragmented the polity becomes. The more military officials get involved in issues of politics, governance, and national interest, as we have been seeing in Pakistan, the more the line between national interest and hawkish national security becomes. Instead of deterring the growth of democracy in Kashmir, the goal should be to empower the populace of the former state sufficiently to induce satisfaction with the Kashmir constituency's role within current geopolitical realities, such that a disempowered populace does not succumb to ministrations of destructive political ideologies. So Kashmir, as I'm sure all of you or most of you are aware, is a highly militarized zone. And it is a nuclear flashpoint between India and Pakistan. And now the third powerful claimant, is China. So, it's a terrible
China
situation.
is making claims on Kashmir?
China is making claims on Kashmir, and China annexed a small part of Kashmir in 1962 called Aksai Chin. And it has now made incursions into the Ladakh province of Kashmir.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now what I'm curious a little bit about is, now you're talking about the militarization of Kashmir, but really you're talking, aren't you really talking about the militarization of India?
In 1989, after the eruption of a secessionist movement in Kashmir, the response of the government of India was belligerent, not diplomatic. They did not make attempts to bring all stakeholders to the table in order to discuss a negotiated settlement. There was no attempt to build common ground. Instead, the response was belligerent, as I said, and militaristic. And the Indian military has enjoyed carte blanche in Kashmir since 1989. So they have enjoyed impunity and have gotten away with human rights violations that they have been responsible for in that region, in that part of the country. There has been a consistent attempt to centralize, to assimilate Kashmir into the Indian Union, to revoke, to erode its autonomous status over the years, to completely incorporate it, and to take away the rights and privileges of the people that were guaranteed to them by the Constitution of India, as well as by the Constitution of Kashmir.
Yeah, got it. Okay, and I actually will be able to show you, Nyla, the magazine, which is just off the press. I just got it at 7 a.m. The delivery man came with a box of these magazines, and it has your article in it about Kashmir. So those of you who want Peace Magazine, you can read about her analysis.
Very nice.
In calling for defunding, should we suggest that the forces for peacekeeping should be better prepared and better and sent in larger numbers to areas of conflict?
Alan, do you want to speak to that? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to mention on this that in conflicts, there are a range of techniques and modalities which can be employed, including from the United Nations. The peacekeeping forces is something we know quite well because they're publicized. But there are many other initiatives and mechanisms which can be used. And one example I give is the UN Special Envoys to support the global ceasefire initiative that UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres announced at the beginning of the COVID crisis, when it was evident that the continued armed conflict would be detrimental to managing the virus and implementing the public health measures that be required and responding to the economic and health impact of it. Then he both did the political announcement of calling for the ceasefires, but he also gave additional support to UN special envoys in conflict areas in order to help them facilitate mediation and conflict resolution between the warring parties. Now, not all of the warring parties have agreed to the ceasefire. Not all of them have taken that up, but some have. And that's been useful. The problem that we have with this, and this is just one of the mechanisms in the UN, there are a number of others also.
Alan, may I ask which countries or which warring parties have and which ones have not responded to Guterres's?
Cameroon is one that responded. Sahara, I think, with their warring parties responded. There's about 4 others. I don't know them all, but what was required also was to give, one, more political support for this initiative through a UN Security Council resolution, but they couldn't get the US to support that. And secondly, some more understanding, that the resources for the UN should be increased, not reduced. Because if you look at the United Nations annual budget, the core budget of $6 billion, it's a fraction of the global military budget of $1.9 trillion. And governments keep saying, oh, the UN should, be more efficient and cut the funding. So there isn't sufficient funding to support the global ceasefire and the special envoys in their work. I mentioned the envoys because I see that they play an even more important role than the peacekeepers. The peacekeepers are really important, but that comes when you have an agreement. The peacekeepers come in once the warring parties have agreed to have a ceasefire, and then the peacekeepers come in to ensure that both sides keep to that ceasefire. But the agreement of the ceasefire is the initial step, which is so important. And that's where you have the UN Office of Mediation and the UN Special Envoys playing an important role. But very few people know about them, and there's very little financial support or political support for them. So I think we need more political and financial support for that. Also, there are a range of other mechanisms I mentioned in the UN, like there's the good offices of the UN Secretary General for Mediation. That's something which we used in New Zealand, for example, when the French Secret Service blew up our peace boat, the Rainbow Warrior, and then France put an economic boycott on New Zealand because we caught 2 of their agents. So what are we going to do? We're a small, country, and France is very powerful, and that economic boycott meant that none of the European Union could trade with New Zealand, because of, France's terrorist act against us. So we called in, the good officers of the UN Secretary General's Mediation Service and managed to resolve that dispute with France, and the boycott was lifted, and etc. There's also the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice has been very effective in resolving several disputes where there had been wars. And again, it's not well enough known. I mean, one of those examples was Costa Rica, and you may know Costa Rica abolished its army in 1949 after a civil war, and so relies now on these international mechanisms for resolving conflicts, and that's included 2 invasions. And the most recent one was about 5 years ago, and that was Nicaragua invaded the island and the river and claimed it for Nicaragua. Costa Rica didn't have an army. But they decided they weren't going to re-establish the army, which they could, to kick Nicaragua off the island. They took it to the International Court of Justice, and they resolved that, and the International Court of Justice basically found in favor of Costa Rica. And because of the importance of international law and international relations, Nicaragua went along with it and withdrew from the island. So these are some of the mechanisms that are in the UN that are underfunded and undersupported, unknown, and not sufficiently promoted. I think maybe it was Tamara who mentioned that sort of, when a crisis comes up, suddenly everybody says, what are the military going to do about this? Send in the troops. That's the total wrong idea. Send in the peacekeepers, send in the mediators. Maybe it's a dispute to go to the International Court of Justice. Maybe it's from the good offices of the UN. Maybe it's a special envoy of the UN. There are so many, or maybe there are also mediators in the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which Canada is a part of, which has been really important in the whole Ukraine situation. It's the OSCE which negotiated, the agreement, the Minsk agreement, and it's been monitoring this. So these are sorts of things which we need more publicity to, more and more support, and it's much broader than just UN peacekeepers. Thanks.
Terrific, Alan. Your point of view.
On the issue of peacekeeping, I just want to mention that Canada is at its lowest level of peacekeeping in our history. According to the UN Peacekeeping Office, Canada is right now at 35 soldiers wearing the UN blue helmets. The Canadian military is not trained at all for a nonviolent conflict mediation, and we are not training for peacemaking and peacekeeping. We're not doing that because Canada doesn't want to do that. The other thing is we don't invest adequately in global affairs for our diplomats, and Canada doesn't have any capacity for international conflict mediation and resolution. The country that does is Norway. Norway beat us in the competition for a seat on the UN Security Council. One of the reasons why is because Norway has an excellent reputation for trying to mediate international conflict, because they have a well-honed, well-invested, like a cadre of trained diplomats. Alan brought the point up about the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE. Russia is also part of that organization. And they're doing excellent work. I encourage people to look at their website. I mean, they're another reason why NATO is not necessary, is because we have these kinds of organizations that can help deal with conflict among nations.
Thank you, Tamara. And Saul Arbus.
I want to bring the conversation back to the opportunities that are presented here. First of all, about what Alan was talking about. He didn't make any mention. I'm very interested in his point of view and others of the possibility of the UN Emergency Peace Service to contribute to what the envoys do, and are not only brought in, as you pointed out so properly, that the UN peacekeepers are called in only after a ceasefire is in place. The UNEP's idea is prior to that. It's to mute the escalation of violence in the first place, leading to the ceasefire, and presumably assisting the envoys. The other thing I want to talk about that I think is the incredible opportunity that through the work of Tamara and many others, I've done this summary of expenditures in Canada, and most of these expenditures, we have to remember, they don't include combat missions. Our mission in Afghanistan cost a minimum of $18 billion, a loss of life of 170 or so, immense loss of and a tremendous financial commitment. And what has it ended up? It's ended up with the United States talking to the Taliban about the formation of a new government and the withdrawal of US forces, and has excluded the actual elected government of Afghanistan into those discussions. So we are back to ground zero, or actually much worse than ground zero. I don't know what you call it. And that's just another part of the futility of our military missions, which we are, I don't think we're featuring enough. A profound failure on all counts, and we're back to ground zero. And that was because of the power of national defense. In 2003, when we considered how we would be if we were going to be at all in Afghanistan, the only department, the only ministry that had any idea was the Department of National Defense, because we had no offsetting, no other input from peace building side, from a minister of peace building, for example. So they dominated the conversation and led to this tragedy. But again, the other thing I wanted to mention is this tremendous opportunity. Where is the money going to come from for the post-COVID recovery? For dealing with not just the recovery of the economy, but dealing with the questions of inequality and equity and greening the economies, which seems to be the overwhelming in Canada and probably all over the world. This is what people want. People are talking about inequality in a way that's never happened before, because of the way that the pandemic has featured this, unfortunately. So where's the money going to come from? The money's going to come from defunding militarism, defunding the police, and defunding the military in the ways I said, with the restriction that however you define it, the ability to have a standing force for self-defense, whatever that means. And my article, which I hope will be published soon, it asks the question, who is the enemy? So we need to focus, I think, on defunding militarism on all levels to allow for a post-COVID sustainable recovery. And on the question of human security, Peggy Mason of the Rideau Institute and others are talking more and more about using the phrase sustainable common security, which I think is a very good phrase and very descriptive of what we're seeking.
We put that, by the way, as one of the planks on our platform for survival. sustainable common security is the phraseology that we use, which really does largely encompass the notion of having the United Nations provide us a peace service, which would not only be military or like peacekeepers, but would include mediators and civilian personnel and so on. People going in when they see something heating up in an area, should be able to send people immediately, try to solve the problem before it gets out of hand. Thank you so much, Saul.
Couple of questions. What sort of urgent action can be taken to ensure accountability for sexual violence by UN peacekeepers?
Mm-hmm.
And how can transparency and a greater political will within the UN be ensured? Also, when I think of the complicity of UN peacekeepers in sex trafficking in Bosnia, for instance, and child sexual abuse in Chad, Haiti, etc., how can processes for gathering evidence against atrocities committed by UN peacekeepers be strengthened in conflict zones?
There was a conversation about that about 5 years ago. I don't know that I've heard anything since the events in Bosnia.
I would say one of the first things that we need to do as Canadians is hold our own peacekeepers accountable. The Canadian government very quietly brought back RCMP officers that the UN wanted to investigate in Haiti for sex trafficking and sexual abuse against Haitian children and Haitian women. And the Canadian government still has refused to turn over these officers and allowed them to retire so that they've escaped any accountability. So we need to hold ourselves accountable first. The other thing is there is a lot of sexual abuse and a sexual harassment against women in uniform in the Canadian military. This is another reason why we need to demilitarize, is that it's a male-dominated organization. 85% of the Canadian military is men, while women make up only 15%. And the reports show, the analysis show that women in the Canadian military, all of them are, have been faced with sexual harassment or sexual abuse.
Yes, here's Bruna.
Jump in. Yeah, I would like to jump in on the peacekeeping part. Part of the essence of Security Council Resolution 1325, which was passed in 2000, and has a lot of that peacekeeping issues and non-militaristic response to conciliation. And all of us have not made any mention of that. And it seems to me that it is that particular resolution 1325 really has the role of women from the pre-decision of if a peacekeeper should be put in, what kind of peacekeeping, what kind of terms of reference are given and so on. So it is a very comprehensive resolution, which we should give legs to, and it has been generally very ignored. Another point about sexual violence against women, there has been oodles of studies University of Leeds has the ultimate study, I think, that was commissioned in the 90s, I believe, by the UK and France to look at national military bases and their impact on sexual harassment and sexualized behavior in the environment, because there is always the element of saying, well, men will be men and they are under pressure and they're outside of their environment and everything else. This was UK and France, home bases, their own, and the study that University of Leeds has done really proves how much in those bases, sexual harassment and domestic violence and the proliferation of prostitution in the villages around are prevalent. I think Ursula Franklin, she was talking, should be postmenopausal women as the only people to be recruited for peacekeeping. That was her recipe.
Okay.
I'm the incoming co-chair with the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, and won't pretend to be ever filling Janice Alton's shoes, who is now the past co-chair. Anyhow, I just thinking about some solutions and ways of bringing in the community and creating greater awareness. We here in the Kootenay area, we have combined communities, the West Kootenay along with the Okanagan, to form, and this has been for many, many years, the Southern Interior BC Peace Coalition, which consists of perhaps up to 12, a dozen or so, or maybe more or less, of different peace groups from Kelowna, Vernon, and of course, Nelson, the Valley, Castlegar, and so on that Vera was referring to. And one thing is, in terms of the efforts that the Canadian government is planning to do greater recruitment of recruits, and the efforts that they're putting into schools. They're setting up systems and at career days and so on, and various ways to entice young people to join the ranks of the military, offering grants, offering scholarships, and so on.
What happened? We lost you, Hannah. All right, Claire Adamson, you have had your hand up a while. Let's hear from you.
The question about military, improving the military, and I'm with the World Federalists, which some people say that's the opposite side. You're not supposed to be there, because they like to send people over to help control security and so on, because they realize that the world would be lovely if it were peaceful, but some places are just so upset that they really think that they need help, and their idea is to educate the military workers better, and also in human resources to hire people who are interested in helping peace, because some people join the police thinking, oh, I like telling people what to do. So they have to, when they're hiring people, they have to choose people very carefully, and right now they just take anybody. So it, we really do have to keep our inspections also for the United Nations military, because I've heard that they say there's no control. You can do anything you want if you have your blue cap on.
Claire, I'm also a member of the World Federalists, Toronto branch. I wasn't aware there was a conflict between what is being advocated in peace keeping or peace promotion circles and what we were doing, but perhaps that's because I'm quite new. I wanted to perhaps try and take the discussion back for a moment to the references that were being made to the military-industrial complex. As I pointed out in the chat room, am one of many who have commented on it really being a military-industrial entertainment complex. I mean, there's been a lot written about Hollywood's rise that coincided with the rise of the American military. military and how it has evolved in a number of ways, particularly through popular culture, nowhere more than in video games, which is one of the most popular and lucrative investments you can make on the stock market today. You've got esport that's being taught in universities across the country, the world, really.
You refer to e-courses as if, huh?
Esports.
Esports. Now, what is it? To explain that, because I think maybe not everybody knows that. I don't know anything.
Well, first of all, let's start with video games. And now, esport is a collective approach to online game playing, whether it's things like Fortnite or Call of Duty or some of these other military violent video games. And people are making tons of money on this. It is being, the nature, whole stadiums have been opened up around the world, and one recently opened in Richmond, Virginia, now with, or Richmond, BC rather. Now with COVID, of course, people can't gather in groups, but it certainly hasn't stopped people from gathering online for this kind of sport. And I know that courses in how to become proficient in e-sport are being taught at UBC and at U of Toronto and other universities around the world.
That's the interesting thing. The notion that a university course would be offering training in playing video games?
That's right. I'm not kidding. I write about it
What's
in
the
my
rationale?
book.
How can anybody justify offering a course in something like that?
Well, that's a very good question, and I don't know why the people who run sports programs in universities aren't speaking out about it. There have been articles in the Globe and Mail about how these more and more young people are gravitating toward e-sport and away from your more traditional sports, whether you have a problem with them or not, whether it's football or tennis or hockey or something else. And this in itself should raise alarm bells. Now, whether you happen to be concerned about climate crises and indiscriminate use of fossil fuels.
Would this be sponsored by the athletics programs of the university so that people take courses in, I mean, you could take courses in tennis. I think I took.
That's right. That's right. No, it's my understanding, Metta, from what I've been reading and tracking in the mainstream media reports on this, that these courses are outgrowths of film and technology programs. And there's another sore spot to all this. Terry, you're so concerned about funding in the military that an awful lot of our tax dollars go into the production and distribution worldwide of these violent video games. And Canada happens to be one of the largest producers and distributors of them per capita in the world.
Really? Okay. Well, we've got a whole new thing to work on here.
I just wanted to speak to the people about mobilization and acting locally. You can think globally, but you must act locally. And I'm in a small town out in Nevada, and we started something called the Youth Militarization Awareness Project, where we went into the high schools and tried to talk to mostly the seniors who were graduating that year, and talk to them about other options besides joining the military, because this is a military town, and their modus operandi for many, many years, being part of military families, was you graduate high school, you do your duty for your country, you sign up with the military, and then you can think about college. And we tried to reach the kids and say, you know, you don't have to go with that. And we were very unsuccessful.
Really?
Once they are inculcated by their family, there's nothing you can do about it. You can try, and that gave us, you know, some feeling of, you know, that maybe we can make a difference. But we were unsuccessful. And we had a band of lefties out here called the Reno Anti-War Coalition, and we had constant protests when anybody came to visit. The big politicians from Washington who don't really give a shit. What we did was, we protested their very appearance here. We didn't even want them in our town.
Metta,
Yeah?
was anybody speaking about Conscience Canada? Was that what we
Not
do?
yet. This
Not
is
yet?
exactly a good time for you to
Oh,
talk
well.
about it, because we're talking about defunding the military.
I mean, we've been going since the end of the 70s, the early 80s, with not paying the military portion of your taxes. And this is one way that's very concrete, and it should get through to the politicians who are in power as well as to the CRA people. But it has not convinced them yet to pass the bill, which we keep putting in, the conscientious objection to military taxation bill. The government can't seem to get their head around that at all. But there are a number of people across the country who still do put in, it's about 9% off of their owing taxes.
And what happens when they do that? What do
they get? Letters from the CRA people saying you owe us such and such, and that goes on. And if it's a significant amount, I think people have had it removed from their bank accounts or garnishing their wages in some way.
How often does that happen, and how often do you get away with it, so to speak?
Well, I mean, in my case, I got away with it for a number of years until I turned senior citizen, and then they could stop paying me all the GST refunds and so on that I was due until the debt was paid off. Yes. But our legislation is in the hope that we get a law passed that it's legal to put all our tax money into non-military, into peace building fund enterprises. Yeah, that's what we would like to see the government pass. I mean, if there were a Department of Peace, it could, go into supporting the Department of Peace. But that's a hard one as well.
Our friend Saul could maybe elaborate on, because maybe not everybody knows about the notion of the Department of Peace, but he's our resident expert.
I am one of the co-founders of the movement to create a Canadian Department of Peace, and then also the Global Alliance, which hopes that all nations, just like all nations have a Minister of Finance or a Minister of National Defense, formerly the War Department, we'll have ministers of environment, we'll have ministers of peace or peace building, depending on how it's spoken of. In Canada, where our movement is quite alive, we have had 2 private members' bills that have been presented. And in fact, we've had all parties, except of course the party in power, that has supported the move towards the Department of Peace in Canada. But it would stand alongside and to counter the tremendous influence of the Department of National Defense, in particular, that all issues related to peace and security would go through a window of nonviolent application of alternatives to belligerent activity, and that would be mandated in the legislation, and that would we hope that would forever change the nature of decision making within cabinet, which, as I explained in the case of Afghanistan, there was nobody else at defense that had any idea of what to do, and that's what happened. We went into this ill-fated mission.
Thank you, Saul. We have 2 people here from Northern Ireland.
Recycle things, but we need to, there is a danger where a trade union, leadership have created this culture in the unions that, about defending jobs no matter what it is, by all costs. And that cannot happen.
That's a very important point to bring up, and I'm surprised that we haven't discussed it at all yet, which is, if you defund the military, they're going to people be claiming that you're cutting out jobs that are essential. And right now in Canada, we have that particular argument that's very relevant to a very important issue about whether or not Canada should be selling military equipment to Saudi Arabia. And they continue to do it, and largely because if they cut off that contract, it would indeed kill a lot of jobs.
Is that both Bombard being the aeronautical aero, company, and then of course Harnwell being a shipyard. They're both making things for Britain as far as making arms as well. So that is very, very dangerous. And there has to be and I've stressed this at different groups. And even my environmental groups, have got to be looking at, the arms, changing the arms trade as well. You know what I mean? Because we're going to change global warming, we've got to change the arms trade. It goes hand in hand together, and it's really, really key that we have to get the unions thinking outside, and also don't forget also the USA. There's also union Shannon Airport as well. Now Shannon Airport in Ireland. Ireland is supposed to be for a long time was a neutral country, and they're actually they're actually undermining that neutrality. We're using Shannon Airport as American base, so it's really, really key. The whole island needs to be neutral.
Now, are you suggesting that really the key is to work with and change the attitude of the unions being the people representing the interests of the employees and their jobs are at stake? Is that the point that?
Absolutely, absolutely. It starts with union leadership. They set the example, and it goes down to that. It's really, really key.
I think the business of the importance of jobs and being able to make that transition from, if you're in the practice of screwing together the components of an armored personnel carrier, for example, and that's all you know how to do, and somebody says, well, go out and install solar panels instead, you can make a better living doing that. That's great, but if you don't know how to do it, how many people are going to do that? I think there's a real challenge there to try to organize the transition for people who would, in fact, have to stand to lose a lot.
The technology is already there. The expertise is there in these places.
Say it again?
The technology is there. The expertise is there. The Harland & Wolff has made things like bridges. They've made wind turbines. But what we need to look at is, we can make things using recyclables. The science is there.
The science is there, but it also, I think, requires the organizing of people to go out and try to make it happen. People aren't going to automatically think, I'll quit my job and go into a different line of work.
No. It's not straightforward, but but the possibilities is there. Well, there's a will, there's a way. You know what I mean? But of course, the unions need to be on board on it.
Getting to the people whose jobs depend on this, and I'm not sure there's any organization that's working from that angle. Do you know of any? Anybody know of any?
What about also kind of in the notion of union social support systems as well as social organizations, that type of thing within the armed forces, and what role would they play in kind of transitioning away from that type?
There's an extraordinary group from within the workers in oil and gas. It's called Iron and Earth. And what they have done is they've intervened directly. They are providing their own retraining programs for oil and gas workers in the field of solar and wind, particularly solar. And it's going very well. And those are the kind of things that are being most important to get behind.
The Shekel Ger has been working with unions because some of them even work there, and they get free trucks and sound equipment for demonstrations for peace. And they keep working with unions, trying to get them. They have a lot of committees in unions, as you just found out. And Council of Canadians also works with the unions for environment.
Thank you. And Tamara, you have the last word.
The largest federal youth program is the cadet program. So the federal government, militarizes our youth through the cadet program. I also wanted to let people know that Murray Brewster a reporter with CBC did this excellent book on Canada's war in Afghanistan called The Savage War. It's absolutely terrible what the Canadian military did in that country. And then somebody made the comment, Rich, I believe, about how important it is to take local action. And I just want to encourage everybody to join me in trying to help stop the fighter jets. So I have these signs that I made up, and I send a letter every month to my member of parliament to say to the Canadian government, I do not want our government to spend $19 billion on 88 new fighter jets. We have a year and a half to mobilize, and I'm starting next month to protest every month outside of my member of parliament's office to stop the fighter jets. And I think that this is a really critical way for us to raise awareness about defund the military is through this defense procurement. Let's stop it, and then use that to have a bigger conversation about militarism too. But I think we can succeed in this, but it's going to require a national effort. So I really hope that wherever you are in the country, that you will contact your member of parliament and say no new fighter jets.
This conversation is one of the weekly series Talk About Saving the World, produced by Peace Magazine and Project Save the World. Please visit our website at tosavetheworld.ca, where you can sign the Platform for Survival, a list of 25 public policy proposals that, if enacted, would greatly reduce the risk of 6 global threats to humankind. Come back next week for another discussion of a serious global issue.